Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us this afternoon. We're really excited to be in conversation with Reuben Miller and also Colette Payne and Kilroy Watkins and Darrell Washington today to discuss Reuben Miller's new book, Halfway Home: Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration. Today's event is a collaboration between the Posen Family Center Human Rights Lab, the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, and the Seminary Co-op Bookstore. And I just want to give a shout out and express my gratitude to all the folks who helped make this event possible. Tracy Matthews, Tiara Kilpatrick, Darrell Washington, Kilroy Watkins, Tommy Hagan, David Knight, Madeline Wright, Jacqueline Gaines. Thanks so much. We also have Kelly Shindeel here with us today, who's offering live closed captioning to all. So we're thrilled to be here today. There really couldn't be a more relevant and more pertinent time for Reuben's book to come out, as we continue to see the devastating consequences of the crisis of mass incarceration. And as his book so beautifully and eloquently illustrates, incarceration follows us, follows folks even after people leave the bars. So it's so important for us to be having this conversation today. Reuben Miller is an assistant professor here at the University of Chicago at the Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. His research examines life at the intersections of race, poverty, crime control, and social welfare policy. And his new book is based on 15 years of research and practice with currently and formerly incarcerated men, women, their families, partners, and friends. We're so happy that Kilroy Watkins and Colette Payne could also be with us today to be in conversation with Reuben. Kilroy Watkins made his journey home just a couple of years ago. Kilroy is a torture survivor. He's on the advisory board of the Chicago Torture Justice Center. He also works with the Education Justice Project, Education Justice Project's Reentry Advisory Board, and is a community fellow with the Human Rights Lab here with us. Colette Payne is the director of the Reclamation Project for the Women's Justice Institute, has been a longtime advocate for women who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. Colette previously worked with Cabrini Green Legal Aid, and Colette is actually part of a new report that just came out by the Reclamation Project called Redefining the Narrative. And we'll have the opportunity to talk about that a little bit more during the conversation. And as our moderator today, we have Darrell Washington. Darrell Washington is a graduate student here at UChicago. Darrell works with the lab for the last couple of years, has helped to co-facilitate the think tank at Stateville Prison, along with myself and others with the Prison Neighborhood Arts and Education Project. I've had the lovely opportunity to have Darrell TA for 2 of my classes, and it's been such a joy to have his presence in my classes all the time. And you'll get to see him in action right now, always digging deeper, diving deeper into all the hard issues. So I am going to pass it over to Darrell to begin our conversation.
Thank you, Alice. Is my sound coming in? Okay, sound check. I'm good. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Really a pleasure to be here with you all today and be in conversation with some of my favorite people since I've moved to Chicago. Just for folks who are checking in, could you all engage with the chat? Let me know where you're checking in from. And if you have questions throughout, please post them. We'll get to your questions a little bit later. I'm live from New York after one of the bumpiest plane rides I've ever had this morning. So like super happy to be on the ground and planted and joining in on this conversation. So I'm thinking if we could start by Reuben, Colette, and Kilroy going around and really quick taking a minute just to inform everyone how you all come to this work. And yeah, so let's start with Colette and then everyone else can chime in.
Yeah, thank you. So I've come to this work. I'm a woman with lived experience. I did my first prison sentence at the age of 14, cycling in and out the system, coming home in 2012 for the last time. I've been working in policy and advocacy and trying to change systems, trying to prevent entry. I mean, all of the above. So yeah, it's just terrible and I'm working on it. Thank you.
And let's go to Kilroy.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here with you guys today. Many of y'all probably tired of seeing my face. I'm so involved and engaged. I returned home 2019 after nearly 30 years in prison as a result of being picked up and tortured as one of many, 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 many African-American males in Chicago. My criminal case continued to this day. I have a pending court date coming up maybe in 3 weeks. Nevertheless, I hit the ground running, partnering up with a longtime advocate and friend, Professor Kim, stepped into the doorways of Chicago Justice Torture Center and right away partnered up and worked up with other torture survivors and the community through RISE meetings and felt that wasn't enough and continued to reach out to work and responds to the need for reentry guides. And I partner up with the Educational Justice Project, but also Parole Illinois to stress the importance of why it's important for a discretionary board to come back and give so many of my counterparts and my comrades a second chance. I'm only here to be able to sit with you guys, not necessarily because the board released me as I served my complete sentence. And despite me building an educational path and a model inmate background, that didn't mean anything. And for many of those in that situation, who's actually obtaining higher degrees and doing great in prison, there's no system currently that exists that allowed them to, show their rehabilitation potential, they change, their transformation. And so I'm out now to try to work on that. I'm partnering up with a lot of those within the Lieutenant Governor's Office, JEO, to help shape criminal justice reform, to bring many of these guys home, many of these women home. We need them out here. They don't need to be languishing away in that place. And so it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to chat with my good friend, Professor Rube. Yeah.
Thanks. Darrell, should I just jump in? Thanks so much. This is a blessing. I just feel fortunate to be in conversation with friends and to see so many friends on the call, old and new. It's just a blessing to me, and thank you for opening the space for me to talk a little bit about this work with our esteemed friends. My work started in 1997. I was a family educator, a social service worker at a group home for kids who were separated from their families because they committed a sexual assault or against another kid in the family. And I don't typically think about that as the beginning of this work. I didn't until I started writing the book. I used to think that the beginning of this work was in 2003 when I was a volunteer chaplain at the Cook County Jail. I did that for about 5 years. And this is, of course, during the height of mass incarceration. 2008 is when we had more people in a cage in an American jail or prison than we had in any year prior, and really any year since, at just over 2.4 million. But during that period, I thought I wanted to be a chaplain. I thought I wanted to do that with my life. And I got fascinated is the wrong word. I got concerned about all the people who looked like me who moved in and through that place. And I'd see my neighbors and my friends. I see folks from my neighborhood who I'd hang out with them at I see them at the store, at the grocery store. I see them at, just sort of out and about, and they'd be people who I spend time with as a chaplain, delivering death notices, spending time with their families and friends. And so I went to graduate school largely because I wanted to be a better chaplain. I got a social work degree because I thought I wanted to be a clinician. And then I started studying mass incarceration in earnest and got a PhD in sociology and started thinking about the impact of mass incarceration. So while I'm doing this work, I meet my father, who I didn't meet until I was in my late 20s, who it turned out he did 20 years inside. He was a retired Black soul. But we didn't form a relationship. It's what mass incarceration does, I think, in powerful ways. And then later, while I'm writing this book, in fact, the book that we're talking about today, my brother goes to prison. Now, he had been to jail and, in juvenile detention and these kinds of things before, but he gets locked up while I'm writing the book. I say this to say that it wasn't direct experience that brought me to the work. It was just a curiosity, a kind of an ethical impulse. There was a scripture that touched me. I'm a religious guy. Matthew 25 says, "When I was sick in prison, did you visit me?" And then when I look back over my life, I see that work started a while before, that same ethical impulse to work with these kids who were being accused of sex crimes, basically, and who were being separated from their families into another kind of cage, a group home. But it wasn't the direct connection. I found out about the direct connection after I started doing this work, if that makes sense. And that's because I hope that the book's argument is right. I mean, if you're born poor and Black after 1972 in this country, you can't avoid the prison. And so that's the origin of the work. Starts with a curiosity, an intellectual curiosity, an ethical impulse. But it touches me like it touches every other person in this country. 1 or 2 families in this country have a loved one who's been to jail or prison.
Thanks, everyone. So, Reuben, the first question is going to be for you. You often refer to those who are trying to navigate life as a formerly incarcerated person as a carceral citizen. And you also talk about the collateral consequences that are associated with being such. Can you first explain for those who may not know what exactly is a carceral citizen, and what are the collateral consequences of holding such an identity?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Darrell. So citizenship in my view consists of rights, restrictions, and responsibilities. It just so happens that the 3 R's is not, it just kind of shakes out that way. It wasn't like we're not trying to do this, but it's sort of how it happens. And there are also benefits. That's not an R, but there's a B. And what occurred to me following people for many years, so I spent, as I mentioned, starting in 1997, hanging out with people who had been impacted, the 2000s, spending time directly with people who are locked away in jails and prisons in this country. And then my own research, which starts in 2007, really starts deeply in 2008 and then continues until the present, following people who are being released from American jails and prisons or who are spending time in jails and prisons across the country. It occurs to me that they have different sets of rights, rules, restrictions, responsibilities, and benefits than other people. So it raised a set of questions for me. We have been talking about second-class citizenship among this group forever. There's a bunch of work on second-class citizenship, including Bruce Weston's brilliant book from 2006, Punishment and Inequality in America, where he has this beautiful discourse at the end of that book on citizenship. And he talks about mass incarceration as eroding citizenship. And then others follow that. And of course, people were talking about that before, but others followed that work. And they were talking about second-class citizenship. And they think about things like the pedagogical role that citizenship plays. In other words, what are you taught through your everyday interactions about your role in the country, about the position that you play, about your role in the demos, as it were. And what they said was that the role is anti-democratic, that the world is that way, that it doesn't want to hear your voice, that it shuts it down, and that you're treated as if you're not a citizen, or you're treated in a diminished capacity. Your citizenship is worse. And I think that's right. But I think it's also right to say that if we think about citizenship as these 3 things, as rights, restrictions, responsibilities, and the 4th, benefits, then we see that there's an alternate set of rules that apply to folks with criminal records that don't apply to anybody else, that they don't have the same rights that other people have. It's not a diminished set of rights, it's a completely different set of rights. that there may be some perverse benefits associated. So, for example, if you have a high enough risk score, then a reentry program might open its doors for you. So theoretically, I thought that this was different. That this was not diminished citizenship. This was a fundamentally different form of citizenship. If we think about the rules, restrictions, the regulations, the laws, we could think about the 45,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that target people with criminal records. We could think about the 1,033 housing restrictions that they face today. This is as of 2 weeks ago. You know, laws change, but as of 2 weeks ago, 1,033. We could think about the 19,000 employment regulations that people with criminal records face that nobody else faces, solely because they have a criminal record. If we keep it local, and I think about our city, our state, if we think about Illinois, there are over 500 employment regulations that target people with criminal records, and only people with criminal records. And if you include, those are restrictions listed under employment and volunteering. If you include occupational licenses and property rights, that number jumps to about 960. One state, 960 laws, policies, or sanctions that prevent them from accessing whole categories of employment. This isn't a diminished form of citizenship. This is a different set of rules for this group and for nobody else. And so I thought that it would do justice to the group if we thought about it, if we moved in my thinking outside the discourse of power, as it were. And if we didn't take citizenship as the standard, or if we thought about different kinds of citizenship rather than say a particular, like, presume that there's certain rights, benefits, rules, et cetera, for one group, and we think about the ways that they're second class or diminished. If we think about the position that people are placed in as a constitutional contradiction, well, it can't be. If the 13th and 14th Amendment have due process clauses, it can't be a constitutional contradiction. So I decided to think about it as an alternate form of citizenship and start looking at it in that way. And so I think that this group exists in what I talk about as an alternate legal reality. I promise that the book is much less dry than this description, you know, but when I think that the folks exist in an alternate legal reality, and that means something. I think it raises an important question about justice in this country. What does it mean for us to ostensibly have an alternate track of citizenship? Not for us to violate the rules that we set for ourselves because we're hypocrites. That's one giant problem. We do that every day. But what does it mean for us to intentionally create an alternate track for some people and not others? You know, and so this is what I talk about as carceral citizenship. Folks live in what I call a supervised society, which we can talk more about. But the point is that it's different. It's fundamental. It's not diminished. It's not second class. It's not a constitutional contradiction. It is constitutional. It is legal. It is viewed from somebody's vantage as right. This is the challenge.
Thank you, Reuben. This next question is for Kilroy. So I'm thinking back to the political article you were featured in that was written by Reuben, and you shared with him the many challenges that you faced with finding housing and having to leave a job because of COVID. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the difficulties that you faced during your reentry process.
As often, I share something in common, not only with the lived experience of incarceration, what those who are often placed under the scarlet letter of conviction, Class X felon, more than 2 million, depend on how you look at the number, from incarceration, electronic detention, probation, supervision. Once the scarlet letter is placed on you, we share all the commonality, and that commonality is eventually trying now to restart our life behind these laws that Reuben is speaking about, right? These many, and they often is did in the shadows with politicians. They go behind these doors and they come up with these hidden new rules and challenges and policies, and much of the public is not aware of it. And so just, immediately what I realized when I received notice that I was about 3 months short in what we speak of in jail lingo was just 3 months to the door. The first thing that everyone think of is where I'm going to live, where I'm going to go. And that hits heavily on every incarcerated person. And it usually, a few years back, maybe 10 years ago, it really wasn't such an urgent need to address that question because we all had, pretty much our families. But what the laws did now was made it punitive for those families to welcome us back home, right? That was a punishment now. They face evictions. They face suspension of their public assistance. It was a consequence. So now that leave us homeless, that leave us out there, right? And thankful that my niece was able to step up and realize the urgency of the situation. And she was coming to visit me. And she was really offering her floor or her couch. And I humbly rejected that because I knew the challenge it was she had to endure taking back, someone in her home who would need to learn how to adapt in the world all over again after almost 30 years. I didn't know where to go to get identification from. I didn't know how I was going to feed myself. I didn't know how I was going to get clothes from. And they was placing this all on her and her young child. And I told her, no, I would not allow you to do that. But what I will do, I will appreciate your assistance if you help me find some halfway house or some transitional home. And she said, okay. And we communicated by phone all the way up until about a couple of weeks, in which she finally got a response back and said, I have this place out west for you, who said he got a bed for you. And up until that point, we all was nervous. We all was panicking because without that letter of approval coming from some halfway house or transitional home, the consequence is you stay in prison. The counselors come and notify you, hey, I'm sorry to tell you, but if you don't have nowhere to go, we keep you. And I'm like, well, who would create such a cruel policy? If I serve my time, I have the right to be released. You're like, yeah, that's what the public believe. But all in actuality, IDOC is responsible for you until you can have a place to live other than with us. And so if you have an address, let us know about it. But he knew that was going to be very challenging because our former mayor Daley then created so many ordinances within the city that created a problem for the state. And so therefore the state, Illinois Department of Corrections say, well, look, we have no problem with you guys going back to the city. But the mayor and the city council then passed all these restrictions that we pretty much can't release you guys back in the city, right? And we notice where you guys come from. You'll have to go back to your families. So it definitely was a challenge. And it still is in many ways, because we got to often partner up and connect with different people who can assist us, still with locations, directions, emergency assistance, and the pandemic even though it's made that problem quadruple more into a difficult challenge.
Thank you, Kilroy. This one, of course, is for Colette. So women have been the largest rising population of incarceration to date, yet women's experience of incarceration and post-incarceration aren't widely known about. Can you talk a little bit about your own journey post-incarceration and what is unique to the experience of women that we need to be talking about?
Okay, I was muted, sorry, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So my post-incarceration, I've been released many of times. Like I said, I did my first prison sentence at the age of 14. And, my experience at that time, I remember being released back into a community surrounded, just by poverty. I grew up in the Ida B. Wells housing complex. So it was a lot of poverty, a lot of drugs. And each time I was released, after serving 4 prison sentences, I returned back to that same community with little to no support. some of the unique factors and things that I have experienced, like, domestic violence, substance use, being a caregiver of young children, 3 boys, with no support, the stress of that. Having involvement with DCFS, having to worry about who my children are going to be placed with, thinking about once incarcerated during that time, the distance, will I see my children? So it's many unique factors that women face or that women have when it comes to incarceration. But, what we're not mainly talking about is no entry, versus entry. And we need those supports in our community. Like I always say, why does a person have to go to jail or prison to get the services that they need? You see all these re-entry services, but the issue started way before I entered the system, if that makes sense. So it was a lot of unaddressed trauma.
Thank you. So let's go back to Reuben. So one of the things that I feel like you really did powerfully in the book is you get really close, but not close to where like you're overwhelming the story of those that you're sharing. And you talk a lot about your brother and not only his experience as an incarcerated person, but the responsibilities that you had to take on as a family member of someone who was in prison. Can you talk a little bit about the role of families who often play a crucial role when considering the well-being of someone?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for that question. And I think it's a beautiful question that dovetails so nicely after these 2 profound reflections from dear brother Kilroy and sister Colette, who shared with us powerfully some of what that means. On the one hand, there's family who cares for you. On the other hand, there's your responsibility to your family. I think a lot about the folks who I follow who are doing their best to raise their kids 15 minutes at a time through collect calls. Like, what does that mean? What does that do? And then who pays for that call? The family pays for that call. So they're trying to do their thing, right? Like the thing is, something that Colette just said was, thinking about what do I do about my kids. There's a chapter in the book, chapter 5, called Invictory and Spectacular Defeat. It follows a quote from James Baldwin, who tells us that the children, having watched the spectacular defeat of their fathers, and I would say and mothers, will not listen to the society that's responsible for their orphan condition. Now you expect us to listen. You jam us up. You exclude us from the labor market. So before mass incarceration, you exclude us with Jim Crow law. You exclude us through a long history of racism that's so clear. If my last name looks a certain way, I mean, my brother. My mother. I can't say the actual name of my brothers, but my brother. I use pseudonyms throughout the book to protect their privacy. But my mother named me Reuben, for example, because to her that was a Jewish sounding name, and I'd be okay. I'm not trying to make some anti-Semitic screed. This is her rationale. You feel what I'm saying? Like she thought that I wouldn't be read as Black man if she named me Reuben. My older brother's named after some English dude. My middle brother's also got some super English Anglo WASP sounding first name, and our last name is Miller. So it's like it's ambiguous. She was thinking about this. This doesn't mean I'm not saying she was wrong. I'm saying she thought about this when she made a decision about what to name her children. Will they be able to get a job? This is the legacy, the history of racism. This is the afterlife of slavery. This is that's before mass incarceration, of course, and then mass incarceration kicks off. And families are wearing this burden. Families are trying to determine, what are the things that I have to do symbolically to ensure my child has work. Symbolically. That's not the material stuff. You feel me? Like, let's put them in a safe neighborhood. Let's make sure he has access to tutoring or something like that if he starts falling behind in school. Let's make sure his education is right. The primary drivers, the primary things we associate with drivers of the economy. Before that, and this is the woman who left me at a police station, but before that, she had to think about what are the barriers that they're going to face based on the fact of their Blackness. So that's one burden that the family wears before, right before we think about mass incarceration. Now, with mass incarceration, I'm going to make it impossible for you to provide for your family. And then I'm going to tell you that your worth comes from your ability to work. 19,000 labor market regulations, and your worth, everything around you tells you, you draw your worth from your ability to work. Anyway, so to talk about the burdens that family members carry, I mean, so, and also to talk about like why the kind of the strategy to write. You asked kind of a two-part question, and I'm trying to be brief in my response, but it's such a good question. It's hard to be super brief. But it's like, so like the first part is I tried to only show up where I was necessary, where I felt like I was necessary to advance the story. I was taking very seriously Toni Morrison's advice, not to me directly, as if I knew Toni Morrison, like we were homies, but like to the public, which was to write with restraint. She talked a lot about writing with restraint. So I tried to write with restraint, to not be too present, but not be too distant. I needed to be present, I felt like, to get across the emotional tenor of it. I think the emotional burden, this idea of the symbolic weight of having to figure out how you address American racism, for example, and what that is and what that does and what does it mean to carry it? How does that wear on? How does that weather you, as it were? But all
Reuben, I think your sound went away for a second. You're not muted, but your sound.
how about now? Are we good?
Yep, we're good.
Awful. All right. Sorry about that. So like on the one hand, there's the emotional weight of it, of what it means to care for somebody who's locked away, who's taken from you. The weight of losing your kids, the weight of knowing that you can be lost, you can be taken, you can be snatched from so there's your children can be taken from you, which they are often, because we know that something like 49% of Black boys will be arrested before they turn 23 in this country. So just like knowing there's the weight of your child being taken, then the idea that you can be taken from your children, this point that you raised earlier about the increase in the incarceration happening among women, of course, the incarceration of people. So there's that weight, but there's also the costs involved, the emotional costs, the financial costs. It cost me $6.55 to accept each collect call. And that was after a series of reforms in the state of Michigan that drove the cost of that call down to about a third of what it used to be. Right. And so even after that, it was $6.55 per call. But the emotional weight is something that we can't lose sight of, because my brother has to raise his children through those collect calls. Is kind of the point that I'm trying to raise. So we see it show up in the family system. That's why people are in prison. Well, now when you get out of prison, you're locked out of the labor market. This is something that Brother Kilroy pointed to, the niece wanting to, help in the way that she could, and Kilroy knowing like, yo, this is going to be a huge burden on you. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do something else. And then the question of what does it mean to be the person who's receiving care? So there's a sort of a kind of burden that circulates through family systems that has profound effects that we haven't grappled with very well in the literature.
Thank you, Reuben. So Colette, I'm gonna jump back to you.
Okay.
So as the director of the Women's Justice Initiative Reclamation Project, you played a vital role on the recent report that you all released, which provided us with the strategies to cut the incarceration of women in half. Can you talk a little bit about those strategies that you all mentioned in the report?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been working on this report, I mean, for almost 3 years, but it was a lot of strategizing involved, I can say that. So in 2016, when I first got introduced to the Women's Justice Institute, I was invited to be a part of the GIPA assessment, Gender Informed Practice Assessment, being the first formerly incarcerated woman to serve in this role to assess Logan Correctional Facility. And, you know, we went in there for, it was like 4 days, day and night. We're interviewing the staff there, the women who are housed there. I mean, we're meeting them at breakfast, lunch, dinner. We're going to SEG. I mean, we're doing this big assessment, and we're also doing listening sessions with the women who are housed there. So we got, you know, a lot of information. A report was written, recommendations. And then after that, it was like 2017 where we presented the report findings, and it got a lot of attention. And I can say this, that during that assessment, let me go back a little bit, the first assessment, a lot of system stakeholders were involved. You got Lieutenant Stratton, and she wasn't even a lieutenant then, or did she have her role as state rep? So she took a part in this assessment as well. And she vowed that when she became state rep, she would take on some of these issues. So that's when in 2018, you had the Women's Correction Service Act, which is supposed to serve, you know, as a vehicle where they create a, they created a mandate for women to be treated according to gender. That means what are the visiting spaces looking like? If women are pregnant, do they have access to pumping? What are their living spaces look like? Do they have to climb on a top bunk? I mean, it was several things that were included in this bill. And then in 2019, we started the Women's Justice Task Force. Looking at 100 women, it grew into 500. So engaging law enforcement, leaders, most definitely women, my sisters who have served time, and just everybody involved. And that's what it takes, right? So then we came up with a report looking at before, during, and after incarceration. And what does that look like? How are women's needs, their rights, are they being denied? Are they getting what they need in their community? So looking at relationship safety. What is your safety like at home, in the community, when accessing education and services? And what does intervention look like? Because I said we're looking at before first. How can we prevent a woman to entering into that system? Looking at health and well-being. Do whatever system a woman is involved in before, during, and after, does it promote healing? Is there any community based settings where women don't have to go away and be separated from their family? What are those justice system supports look like? And supported families. How are families being supported? I can give an example, like when GCFS may be called, who's coming to interact with that family? How are their biases being used? Like, are we preventing those children from being extracted from the home and placed in some type of care? And then you're looking at safe and stable housing, especially for women with children. What does that look like? Reuben and the brother pointed out, excuse me, I can't think of your name, and I can't see who's on the screen. I just got one person showing. So, you know, thinking about what does that housing look like? We don't even have access to jobs when returning home, access to housing. What does that look like? How are we being socially excluded from family and then from society? I mean, and looking at that women are the primary caregivers of small children, at least 80% of them. children under 3? How are we being supported? So those are some of the strategies, and that's what the focus of the report is.
Mhm. Thank you, Colette. And I see David is posting a lot of the written pieces that we've been mentioning in the chat. If folks want to read them for yourselves. This next question is for Kilroy. Let's think about when you and I shared a space together. So when you and I were both in the Reimagining Justice class, you often ask many of our guest speakers who, like you, are survivors of police torture, what gave them hope. So I'd like to pose your own question to you and to ask you what gives you hope in this space.
That's definitely when you in the dark tunnel and you searching for a light out. IDOC is not in the business of caring. It's in the business of destroying souls. And so, you know, you're around hundreds, if not thousands of broken souls who are in search of hope. And you are one who got to seek out, you know, something that's concrete, something that is meaningful, something that is transforming. And I think my answer came from one of the wise ones I was in there with. One of my mentors and teachers in the law. Name's Brother Sims, but I think he was he's a member of Black Liberation Army of the Mau Mau's, and they hit him on a couple of natural life charges. And many of them nicknamed him the writ writer. He was really smart, federal law, state law. He only looked forward to a cup of coffee and his tobacco. And he would find a space at the table every morning. Everybody can know where he at every given time. He wasn't interested in anything else prison had to offer. Give him his space at the table, his cup of coffee, his robe, and his legal work. And he would sit there and he'll pull his glasses down on the tip of his nose. And I don't care what was going on in the prison system. He was content. And so finally, when I transferred from Pontiac to Stateville, and someone introduced me to him by me working as a law clerk, and he invited me to the table and we chatted, and he realized he called me, in fact, a young pup in the legal game. And he's like, hey, young pup, you know, so you think you prepared for this law work? And I told him, yeah, you know, this is what I want to do for once, to find my way up out of this situation I'm in. I want to prove my innocence. And for two, I'm realizing that it's just not enough law clerks to help out this population of, you know, brothers in here. And he's like, okay, I like that. And I'm gonna see how committed you are to it. You know, do you read a lot? And at this time, I have took a strong interest in reading. And he started recommending books. And I ended up falling in love with reading about historical movements in which individuals survived trauma, government oppression. You know, a lot about the civil rights era, pushing back against the narrative of Jeanette Turner and Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. I started falling in love with these things because it let me know that even though it appeared that you're surrounded by darkness, there is light. Even though you don't see it with your visual eyes, there is light. And as soon as you believe that it is light, light exists. But if you never believe it, you will never, ever, ever see it. And so it was in these historical books, these movements, these struggles, that I realized that it's a very cruel system that American is running with this carceral system or with the so-called legal justice system or with the government. However, I realized that I come from a long line of strong Black people who have continued to find a way to sustain themselves, even up against some of the most egregious attacks. At that point, I realized that how is it that I cannot have hope, that there is light, and that I cannot achieve what others achieve only if I choose to believe in what I was doing, and believe in myself, and believing in other people who have committed themselves to social justice. And they picked up this banner and they running with it. And as one get knocked off, the other one picks it up and say, okay, brother, no problem. You ran far as you can go. I'm gonna run it the rest of the way for you. I like that, and I embrace that. And so that's why I find my hope then, and I find my hope now, to continue working with others who inspire me, to let me know that all the work that's being done, all the work that's being needed to be done, required for all of us to chip in and do our part. And so I love the fact that Professor Rube reached out to me for the political piece, gave me an opportunity to share my experience. I love the fact that Professor Kim often reached back to me and invite me to PNAP and so many other projects. All this is hope. And it led to, and I'm gonna wrap this up on this note right here because it's very important. I realized that we don't really have many Black positive role models that's reflected in the public image, particularly those with prior backgrounds, convictions in their background, formerly incarcerated. When I was on the inside, I heard so many stories about, brother, you're not gonna make it out there. The system, the parole agents is not gonna allow it. They have so many restrictions that is aimed for you to violate you and send you back in this place. You're just not gonna get no help. There's not gonna be nowhere to turn. And so you can listen to that, right? And there's probably a lot of truthness in it cause so many go back for parole violations, even though that's not the intent. So they share with many of us who coming home. So that doubt is
He froze.
Oh man, you froze, Kilroy.
Man.
I'm
There
back.
he is.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
You back.
I met the journalist at the Pro Illinois event, and he was interested in doing an article on me. And I didn't think that I really was entitled for someone to do an article on me, especially State Bill Speak, because I read that paper a lot when I was on the inside. And every brother looked forward to a State Bill Speak. It speaks about us. It speaks about Springfield and legislation and good time and what they're going to do to release us up. So we look forward to that. And this journalist was interested in interviewing me for the art for that paper. And I looked at him and I said, are you sure?
Kilroy, your sound went away.
You're on mute now.
You're on mute.
Okay. But
You're
I
back.
ended up, I took my camera out. Sometimes my device work a little better without my camera. But I did do the article because that journalist said something to me that made plenty of sense. And that was reading about what I'm doing out here and what I'm doing with UC and what I'm doing with Parole Illinois and what I'm doing with these organizations. Give those brothers who are about to be paroled an opportunity to see that. And so I didn't know he was going to put it on the front page. I was a little impressed by that, but nevertheless, I saw receiving mail and it did exactly that. He knew something I did not know. And brothers were saying, hey, professor, I worked with you while you was on the inside. And I gave up because I thought I'd never come home. And someone shared the State Bill Speak paper with me. And I opened it up and your face was on the front of it. And it was talking about what you was doing. And he said he felt inspired enough to pull his box out and his pencil and paper and start litigating, start fighting again, and start going around to the deck and tell the other guys, hey, look, I know this guy. He found a way out of here. We can find a way out of here. So I think it's very important for us to believe in hope and pass hope around. Thanks.
Thank you, Kilroy. Before we transition to Q&A from folks in the audience, I'm gonna ask Reuben one more question. So you speak a lot of, you spoke towards the end of your book about what you call the gift of proximity. And like a quote that I took from it is, the extent to which we understand our lives and the condition in which we live allows us to better understand the lives of other people. Can you unpack for us what it means to get proximate in the work that you do and why this is?
Yeah, thank you for that. And Kilroy, man, the professor speaks, you know, the professor speaks, and we listen. And Colette always doing this powerful and moving work. I think Colette and Kilroy demonstrate this in powerful ways. You know, if you just allow me to talk about you, you know, for a second, please. This is kind of rude to do that, but I think this is a perfect example. So first, they are deeply in touch with their experiences. They were very present through all of them. They didn't flinch. They didn't turn away from the hard parts. They don't only talk about the good stuff. They don't only talk about the triumphs. They tell us about all of it, you know? And so that's important. There's a kind of vulnerability, I think, that's necessary that we're taught as social scientists, but also journalists, storytellers of all kinds, to avoid vulnerability, avoid showing parts of yourself that leave you subject to criticism, that hurt. You know, don't look at the painful things. You know, get distant, get far away, get an arm's length. And so when I look at the work that they're doing, you know, Kilroy is pushing for his own innocence, but also in working with brothers and sisters on the inside, and also for advocating for law and policy change. Colette, we're doing this powerful, impactful work with formerly incarcerated women, especially political leaders, which we haven't had a chance to really talk much about, but that work is brilliant and amazing. You know, they don't run away from themselves, from their own feelings and emotions and what happens and what it was like. And, you know, this is something that they've sat with and wrestled with. And so that's a part of it. So on the first half of it is allowing myself access to my own emotional state, to the vulnerabilities that come with being a human being, a flesh and blood human being. And when we do that, we're able to connect with others, not in the same way. So I haven't been locked up, you know. I also haven't been deported. I haven't experienced discrimination based on the expression of my gender. I'm a man, right? I don't face what it's like to be treated poorly as women in this country, or my sexual orientation. You know, I identify as straight. So these are things I don't know personally, and I don't need to know those things personally to listen and to hear and to connect with people who are experiencing things very different from what I experience on a day-to-day basis. And the reason why I'm able to connect to the extent that I am is because I have gotten in touch with those things that I've experienced in my own life. I haven't run from those things. I haven't flinched. I haven't looked away. I allow myself to be vulnerable. So proximity is about vulnerability. It's about closeness. Closeness allows you, you know, you can be hurt if you're close. And so, but it's a gift. It allows you to see things that other people don't see in your own experience, in your own life. It allows you to connect with people in different ways that you might not be able to connect with them, but it also allows you to see things that people who came before you maybe didn't see, or maybe were afraid to write about. Maybe not even afraid, just didn't care to share, you know, something like that. So that's the gift of proximity. And I think we need that, not just in you know, the craft of social scientific research, you know, or in telling a good story if you're a journalist or a writer or something like that, or any kind of like creative producer of anything. But I think we need that in law and policy. You know, 90% of the problem, I think, a lot of the problem is that people don't identify in, don't see themselves in, don't see their kids in, you know, this kind of thing. And so the questions aren't even asked because people don't allow themselves close enough to see, you know, what's happening. So policymakers don't go where the book goes, don't go where the activism that's represented on this panel go. So the policymaker never understands even fully the problem that they're trying to craft a solution to. You know, that's if they're well-meaning. That's even if they're well-meaning. And so that's the gift of proximity, is allowing ourselves to be close to the people we're following, paying attention to the stories, to the stories that we're trying to document, but also to ourselves. You know, to sit with the emotional content of a moment, to allow it to move you and to be moved by it, and then from that place to think about the solution. From that place to think about how you might craft the narrative that you're trying to craft. So that's what that is.
Thank you, Reuben and Colette and Kilroy for your amazing answers. I want to leave some time before we close to see if there's any questions from anyone in the audience. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you have a question and pose it to anyone on the panel. And also something I enjoy, if like no one has questions, you guys, the panel, if you have questions for each other, like feel free to pose.
I think we have one from David Pate.
I have a question. Can I just, hi, it's great to be here as usual. I've been like a big fan of Reuben's all year, as he knows. I feel like I'm a stalker almost, but he's been helping me to prepare for a study I'm trying to do. And I'm really concerned about whether I should do my work on men who are returning home a year later or immediately when they come out and return home. I've been told that it's a lot of adjustment to returning back home, and to actually have a researcher and ask you more questions about your life at that time seems to me not just. And I would rather give them a year for me to learn more, for them to learn, to reacclimate. I just like to hear people's feedback as to whether they would have been offended by a researcher when they talk to them immediately, or even from Reuben, whether a year later is something I shouldn't wait to do. I'm having some pushback from my IRB, as you can imagine. And I'm trying to decide, I'm trying to go with my own gut feeling of what I think is just and fair.
I can definitely, like, I have a perspective on it. I wonder, Tora and Colette, like what you all think about that too.
Kilroy, I'm going to ask you to jump in here. How would you have felt if right upon release, a researcher would have asked to be following your journey, asking you questions about your life right upon release? I know that Kilroy's first few hours upon release were incredibly harrowing. So I just want to ask Kilroy that question. Kilroy, you're on mute.
Oh, can't unmute.
Okay. All right. Everyone hear me now? I got this box on my string I got to get rid of. Okay. Whether or not how I felt about someone interested about what my mindset was while I was at the transitional home, I think if it is, and I only can answer this as an individual. If you want the rawness, depending on the contents of the story, if you want the rawness of what that's like, I would say that approach it soon as possible, because it's all challenging right there in the moment. In a year, it'd be looked at as a matter of reflection. I'm looking back on it, right? So I'm not in the moment no more. And so therefore, he'll like to immediately get what it's like within that first 30 or 90 days out. Then one can tell them how frustrating, how challenging it is right now. I need this help. A year from now, it can be, oh, it was very hard. I could have used some help. I had to do this. I had to do that. I got it done eventually. But I often want to know, where was you at back then? Why would you come now once I done already figured it out, or someone else has stepped in to help me out? So I think that clearly you want to get on top of this as soon as possible.
I guess when I came home, people always wanted to talk and learn about my experience. It would be helpful, like knowing that folks come home and their basic needs are being met, to offer a stipend to be in community with them constantly, not just wanting to learn about like this one experience, or several experiences, like walking alongside them as they grow. Because when people have that support, they grow to another level. And that's always like offering support too, like an honorarium or some type of stipend to help them with odds and ends. I didn't mind people asking me about my experience, and it wasn't always about the money, because I have done it for free, just because I want to educate people on what it's like. When you educate people, they begin to understand. Not saying that all will understand, but it's about changing hearts and minds and kind of softening folks' hearts, those who don't understand.
Yeah, just as the researcher, you know, from like your, like in your shoes, I follow people both ways. I found the most productive thing to just echo what Kilroy and Colette said. I found the most productive thing to do work over time, to be in relation with people. I mean, some of the folks in the book I followed, like the guy I followed the longest in the book, I followed for like 13 years, and interviewed him dozens and dozens and dozens of times. But those interviews were like, they weren't just interviews, they were like, you know, we're hanging out at the crib, like, you know, like I know his family, he knows mine, you know. It was in forming those relationships. But the stuff you learn is very different. You know, if I asked you, you know, what it was like on the tenure track, you know, that to ask you about that, you know, now is very different than asking you, you know, what it's like when you were growing up. You know, it's just a different, you know, to echo what Kilroy was saying, it's a different, to be in the moment, you know. There are things you lose when you're trying to remember, you know, the things you lose. This point about like being with people as they grow, it's this just a beautiful way to think about this. You know, you get to walk alongside people and watch them develop as people, you develop as a scholar, researcher. I mean, you're like well seasoned in all these things, but you feel what I'm saying? Like you're growing together, like you're growing. That to me was powerful.
Thank you.
I think Dorothy had a question.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I have found this session to be very moving and very inspirational. And I just wanted to ask the question, what can we do as community members to support people when they come out initially? And what kind of support can we continue to be offering, you know, you, Kilroy, and you, Colette, right now, that would be helpful to you?
Mama Dorothy, you know I love you. You've always supported me when I came home. I mean, trying to figure it out, you always continue to give me support. It's organizations that are doing great work. The organization Kilroy works for, where they trying to get commutations, like donations for folks, where if you go on our website, we just raise money for gift bags for women inside. Of course, we would rather have them outside, but we always have like fundraisers, just so those who are inside can have that sense of dignity if they get soap or something fresh or a pair of socks, you know. Yeah, but it's lots of organizations doing great work, but get involved. But you're already involved, Mama Dorothy. So those who are not involved, like, get involved in that way, volunteer, donate, whatever role or job you're gonna go into, take this with you. Think about how am I looking at people who may be suffering from some type of substance use or who go to jail? Think about ways that you're interacting with them, and what does that look like?
Thank you.
Was that helpful, Mama Dorothy?
Very.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Just to add a little bit too to the response, I think that's absolutely right. Like thinking of ways to get involved, especially at the organizational level. And then for those of us who are thinking about I know Colette does this important work thinking about like policy, certainly at the local level. I think the local is where the action is, like always. So the city, the state, like that's very important. Of course, federal policy matters, but really at the city and state level, you know, something that Kilroy said earlier, you know, the IDOC wants to release people back, but there are ordinances in Chicago, the regulations in Chicago that make things look very different. So pushing aldermen, ward bosses, members of city council, you know, at Cook County, you know, they passed a fair housing ordinance that I think might go pretty far. Like that's powerful stuff. When we think about allowing people with certain criminal records, of course, they always restrict folks with what they, you know, with more serious records, which is awful. But to have access to housing, but there's also a kind of an orientation that I'd like to suggest that we need to take. You know, the way we've talked and thought about the needs of this group of people with criminal records has always been service-based. You know, and this is lovely. But what ends up happening is that the needs get met only to the limit of funding, only to the limit of charity, only to the limit of the imagination of the policymaker in a given moment in time. And so I'd like for us to also think about people with criminal records as people like everyone else who are in need of protections. This is a framing that right now does not exist, certainly in state or local government in Illinois, where we think about people with criminal records as vulnerable and in need of access to and protections against predation like everybody else. And so what we often see is across the country, we'll see, for example, sheriffs sending people out of the county jail to go remove asbestos with no mask because they've got some sort of contract. They call it a reentry program. They'll get some contract with a local business owner or something like that. And it's cool. We don't think about it because we don't think about the group as in need of protection. Well, people with criminal records get cancer like everybody else. You know, people with criminal records get sick like everybody else. People with criminal records get worked to the bone like everybody else. So like, if we just always remember at every moment that the only thing special about people with criminal records is that we've arrested them, that we've incarcerated them, we put them through the ringer. Aside from that, they're human beings, right? So including that, if we remember that people with records are human beings, that they're in need of all the same things that we are, and we take that framework and carry it through in sort of policy and practice, we'll have a more just world, I think.
Yes, if I can add on to this, what could one do to offer assistance to those who formerly incarcerated and or those who's currently home now? I think that the major push is what's happening in society as a whole with abolitionist discussions, defund police movements. What we're witnessing is a social conscious movement that's changing from decades ago about how people prejudge individuals. And this country is the author of judgments of some sort. It could be racial judgment, sexual judgment, religious bias. We ground zero for judgments. But I like to advocate that we all are connected, you know, to families, friends, associates, businesses. And I think it's on us to change the paradigm of how those ones around us think, because we all wakening up individuals who probably had some other understanding of what an incarcerated individual experience was like. In other words, we allow government and politicians to create a narrative of don't care about these individuals because they are demons, they are evil, but we protecting you by doing what we're doing to them. That narrative have to change. You got to be pushed back against. For example, I've just read an article, a former incarcerated friend of mine named Gay. He did 20, maybe close to 20 years in solitary confinement. And he's out now and he's supporting the end solitary confinement bill that's up in Springfield. but he's speaking about his experience and how it contributed to his mental health deterioration and the pain around it, and how people labeled him just a bug and gave up on him. And he really was in there for a really, really minor offense originally. And because his mental health breakdown and deterioration, they kept giving him new charges and taking him to court in these little white counties and tacking on more 3 years and 5 years. And so he went from a simple theft, retail theft, of pocketing some item in the store, to end up with 17, 20 years, and is always in solitary confinement. And he's speaking about how he was tormented mentally and contemplated suicide and cut it on himself. Well, without him surviving that, no one out here will have no idea what that experience is like. And I've witnessed it time and time over again of what that solitary confinement is like. And so the only way that you expose injustice, in the words of Dr. King, is bring it out to the forefront, push it in their face, even if it make them uncomfortable, because that silence is contributing to this pain to continue. And so each one of us taking on the responsibility to teach the next one of how important it is to get involved with these issues is very profound and very helpful in the long term. Because now, even when I'm speaking out to schools, universities, public schools, and things like that, I love the fact that when I'm in middle school, that those 12, 13-year-olds, often when I ask, leave room for questions is, how can I get involved? Where can I go? And I often tell them, well, complete school first, right? But try graduating elementary school, right? Try to get out of that first. So I don't want to burden you with just jumping down into the movement. But if you really have an interest, you and a group of friends can get together and agree what y'all have a common cause in that y'all like to stand for that. And you draw a plan up as to what you would like to do to support that cause or to end that injustice, and let it start there. So that little advice, I'm quite sure planting that seed would be future advocates for justice.
Thank you, Kilroy and everyone. So we're unfortunately at time, but 2 quick plugs really quick for all folks who are system impacted, people who would like a copy of Reuben's book. Just fill out the form that I just put in the chat, and we will get that to you. And for those who would like to enter in a raffle for a copy of Reuben's book, you can shoot an email to this email, and we will enter you in that raffle. So just want to thank Reuben, Colette, and Kilroy for just all that you brought to the conversation today, and thank all of my colleagues from the Human Rights Lab, David, Maddie, Tommy, and Alice, and Tracy, and everyone at RPC. And shout out all the folks that I know that's on the call, Dr. Pay, Eric, Mama Dorothy. Good to see everyone today, and appreciate you all, and hope everyone enjoyed their holiday weekend and be safe. And yeah, so we're gonna, before you leave, can you please take a few moments to fill out the brief poll that was just entered in the chat? So I want to make sure I give that out. But other than that, thanks everyone.